Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Wherever you are joining us from the world, welcome, and thank you for joining us for this important webinar on strengthening climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation, land restoration cross-linkages for just and sustainable futures. Just a note, we do have simultaneous translation services available, so if you look on your platform, you'll be able to listen to this conversation in English and in French. And what we'd really like to discuss in this very short hour, what are the key issues for Africa to take into the upcoming COPs this year? So I'm Nadia Sitas. I'm the ecosystem-based adaptation lead for the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, the CDKN program at South-South North in South Africa. And on behalf of CDKN, South-South North and the Resilience Hub, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. So as many of you might know, CDKN works at the intersection of climate and development, empowering decision makers to drive equitable climate resilient development by mobilizing knowledge, capacity, and leadership in the Global South to improve the well-being of the most climate affected people. So this webinar and this discussion today is a critical opportunity for us to discuss how Africa can leverage the synergies between climate change, biodiversity, and land restoration to address rising inequalities, which is especially important as we prepare for the upcoming UNFCCC COP, the CBD COP, and the UNCCD COP meetings and associated events. So essentially, these really important conversations that will be happening at a policy level across land, biodiversity, and climate-related issues. So why this discussion matters is the urgency of our conversation today really cannot be understated or overstated. Africa is facing intersecting challenges. It's one of the most vulnerable continents to climate change impacts, while also grappling with extreme inequality, biodiversity loss, land degradation, and desertification. And these challenges are not isolated. They are deeply interconnected, and the solutions must reflect that. So healthy ecosystems, sustainable land management, and climate resilience are mutually reinforcing, but they also depend on good governance, inclusive and locally led decision-making, and really ensuring that local communities benefit from restoration and adaptation efforts. So at the global level, the upcoming COPs present a timely opportunity for African countries to advocate for integrated approaches that strengthen these cross-linkages. And by bringing climate, biodiversity, and land issues together and the associated rights and responsibilities of diverse actors, we can create pathways to just and sustainable futures that benefit people and nature alike. But however, achieving this requires us to tackle key challenges and opportunities such as gender equity and social inclusion, resource mobilization, capacity strengthening, and fair access to climate finance. So those are some of the topics that we'll discuss in the webinar today. So we'll dive into some of these critical questions and hear from a wonderful panel of experts. And we'll be discussing how Africa can champion stronger linkages between climate change adaptation, biodiversity protection, and land restoration at different scales. We'll surface some of the key issues that African negotiators and stakeholders can focus on as we head into the COPs, and also speak a bit about how we can ensure that our approach to these challenges are equitable, inclusive, and just. And so we're joined by an exceptional panel of experts who will help us unpack these questions. They'll share their insights on policy, finance, practice, and local implementation. And their perspectives can help us shape the African agenda at the COPs and beyond. So before we begin, we're hoping, it's always hard in these online spaces for active participation. But if you can, please share your thoughts, your comments, your questions via the chat. Pose your questions. We'll hopefully have time for our panelists to get to some of those questions, but we really are looking for a dynamic discussion and for new collaborations as we work towards integrated solutions for a joint African future. So thank you again for joining us. And without further ado, let's get started with our first speaker. So I'm really happy to introduce our first speaker, who is Letoro Adrian. He's the co-founder of Nature and People as One. And what we were hoping to do is, as our speakers introduce themselves, they'll give a bit of a background of themselves and their organization. But Letoro, I was wondering if you could just share a little bit with us about, at the local level where your organization is working, just to share how significant the linkages are between biodiversity, climate, and land restoration. Letoro, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nadia. So my name is Letoro. I am co-founder at Nature and People as One, NAPO, and a lot of our work is more focused on community governance and enabling those locally led decision makings and supporting the knowledge that already exists. Our work is based in northern Kenya. We are heavily focused on the dryland forests that are found in northern Kenya. So northern Kenya is generally it's considered an arid and semi-arid area, so it's a dryland. And so there are these pockets of dryland forests that are really critical for community adaptation to climate change, but also for biodiversity. Really, when we speak about the linkages between climate change, biodiversity, and land stewardship up in where we work, it all goes together, right? So the area that we work in, we work with pastoralist communities. These are communities that move around with the livestock, and so it's a very land dependent community. So if the health of the land is really what determines the health of the livestock, and by extension the livelihoods. So the area we work in, specifically at the moment, the Mount Marsabit forest. This forest is home to the communities, the communities that we're talking about, but also to endangered species such as the gravy zebra, the reticulated giraffe. So it has the function of being a home to really endangered wildlife species, but also home to a community who is dependent on this forest, especially during the drought. This is where we have the dryland, the dry grazing areas. So when it gets really dry, all the communities kind of converge in this forest area to be able to get fodder, medicine, and it has several ecosystem functions within the whole dryland area. So this is kind of highlighting what the linkages between climate change, which is the droughts, the land degradation, which is heavily affecting because of more frequent utilization of this landscape, and biodiversity, which is the amount of biodiversity that's there with the endangered wildlife species, but also key plants and species that are specifically within that area. So a lot of our work goes into strengthening the community ownership and the community governance, because these forests exist because of the stewardship that was already being carried out by the pastoralists and the knowledge that has always protected this landscape. So for us, that's a huge and a critical aspect of bringing. When you foster the inclusive conservation and restoration of these landscapes, then it has multiple benefits for addressing, of course, the land degradation, biodiversity loss, but also helping communities to adapt in a space where now it's very uncertain with the weather conditions and the drought. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Letoro. I was wondering, given the work that you're doing with communities and acknowledging them and local communities as stewards of the land and the landscapes, I was wondering if you could share with us some examples of policy frameworks that are having a direct impact at the local level in helping to meet some of these very important local issues, but also connecting to these global targets.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important question in terms of, we always have global targets, but really, how does it get down? How does it trickle down to the local level? And one such example of a policy framework that we're working on is based on the Kenya Forest Act. So it's a Forest Management Act of 2016. And this basically what it does is it enables communities to be able to manage. There's a section that enables communities to be able to manage gazetted forest, or what are considered government forests. So what the process is, basically you have to sign a forest management agreement with the Kenya Forest Service, which is the body that is mandated to conserve forests in the national government in Kenya. And it provides a legal basis, right? So through the participatory forest management plan, this provides a legal basis for communities to be involved in the management of and utilization of gazetted forests, such as, like we said, the Mount Marsabit National Forest. But the thing is, already communities were managing, but now this kind of provides that framework. And it's such policy frameworks that then, they kind of build that the local decision making and bring in the aspect of community governance to a space that usually, is dominated by the gazetted forests are considered government land or belonging not necessarily to a community. So it's this is a clear example, a good example of a framework that can be used as a to show the linkage to the global targets, right? So targets like this on the CBD, target 2 on restoring 30% of the land, and target, I guess, 3 as well, and kind of linking it to also other frameworks that are supposed to help restore our land, but also do it in an inclusive and equitable way, right? So putting communities at the center of such decisions and providing a legal framework for communities to be able to make these decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Letoro. It's such an incredible example of community kind of based ownership and governance of shared resources. And we'll definitely come back to you in the Q&A. And if there's anyone online that has further questions, it's such a wonderful example. I wanted to take us, so we've been chatting to Letoro from Kenya. I wanted to take us slightly west across the continent, where we'll be joined with Maimouna Diouf, who is the gender focal point for Enda Energy, working on climate change issues in Senegal and in some of the countries around. Maimouna, I was wondering if you, similarly to Letoro, faced with the challenges of combating the impacts of climate change and conserving biodiversity to strengthen the resilience of communities, I wondered if you could share some of the practices that you have been involved with with your organization and with the communities that you work with.
Thank you so much, Maria. Hi, everyone. So I would like to be sure that the translation is okay. It's okay? Okay, good. Okay, thank you so much for this question. So my name is Maimouna Diouf. I'm the gender focal point at Enda Energy. So aujourd'hui, puisque la traduction est OK pour permettre aux francophones aussi d'en bénéficier, je vais m'exprimer en français. Et donc, Enda Energy est une ONG qui travaille sur les questions d'accès à l'énergie, sur les questions de changement climatique. Et là, je suis chargée de programme et en même temps point focal genre de l'institution. Par rapport à la question, je vais essayer d'aborder les questions de la biodiversité. Comment aujourd'hui, au niveau d'Enda Energy, on prend en compte cette question? Désolée parce que ma caméra, ça coupe chaque seconde. Je ne sais pas pourquoi. Donc, là, je dirais que ce soit la conservation ou la restauration des terres, c'est un objectif urgent, utile et réalisable pour faire face aux multiples crises mondiales, notamment le changement climatique. Donc, il est temps de passer des engagements aux actes. Et si aujourd'hui, on voit jusqu'à 40% des terres de la planète sont dégradées, ce qui affecte la moitié de l'humanité et a des conséquences désastreuses sur le climat, la biodiversité et les moyens de subsistance. Si la tendance actuelle se poursuit, donc il faudra restaurer 1,5 milliard d'hectares de terre d'ici 2030. Donc ça, c'est quand même énorme pour parvenir à un monde neutre sur le plan de la dégradation des terres. Donc c'est important aujourd'hui de redonner vie aux terres présentes, de multiples avantages, que ce soit pour l'homme, mais également pour la nature. Aujourd'hui, avec les données disponibles, on dit que chaque dollar investi dans la restauration des terres dégradées génère entre 7 et 30 dollars de retombées économiques. Donc, il est important d'investir sur la question de la restauration, de la conservation de la biodiversité. Il est urgent aussi de mettre en place des politiques et des incitations économiques pour débloquer une économie de la restauration d'une valeur de 1000 milliards de dollars. Et donc, pour nous, concrètement, qu'est-ce qu'on est en train de faire au niveau du Sénégal? La conservation, comme on le dit, la conservation signifie qu'il faut une utilisation durable de la nature par les communautés. Donc, je vais donner l'exemple aujourd'hui d'un projet sur la diffusion de foyers améliorés, parce que si on veut restaurer ou bien si on veut conserver la biodiversité, il faut qu'il y ait des alternatives. Donc, l'exemple du projet de renforcement de l'accès aux foyers améliorés qui consiste à diffuser les foyers améliorés pour la cuisson afin de réduire la consommation de bois de chauffe et de charbon. Donc, ce qui permet de réduire la déforestation, de réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Donc, quand on parle de réduction de l'émission de gaz à effet de serre, il y a les questions d'atténuation du changement climatique qui sont prises en compte. Et donc, pourquoi c'est important de prendre en compte cette question en termes d'alternatives? C'est parce qu'en milieu rural, les femmes qui sont chargées d'assurer la cuisson n'ont souvent pas ni d'électricité ni de gaz pour cuisiner. Donc, il faut une alternative. Et c'est pour cela les foyers améliorés permettent aux femmes non seulement de cuisiner, mais également de gagner du temps dans la cuisson afin de pouvoir développer d'autres activités génératrices de revenus. Et donc, comprendre par là qu'il faut aussi restaurer tout en ayant des alternatives qui permettent de réduire la déforestation. Par exemple, jusque-là, la communauté a besoin du bois puisqu'ils n'ont pas d'autres alternatives, surtout ceux qui sont en milieu rural. En plus de la diffusion des foyers améliorés pour une conservation de la biodiversité, il faut aussi restaurer. C'est important de restaurer. Et là, je vais prendre l'exemple de l'écosystème mangrove. Et là, nous avons des partenaires qui nous accompagnent dans le reboisement de la mangrove, comme Mitsubishi Corporation. Avant Mitsubishi, nous avons des partenaires comme Wetland, comme IFDD. Plusieurs partenaires nous accompagnent dans ce processus de reboisement de l'écosystème mangrove. Et donc, quand je parle de cet écosystème mangrove, peut-être c'est parce que c'est un écosystème qui est particulier. Elle constitue une formation végétale suscitant un grand intérêt à l'échelle mondiale. Elle joue non seulement un rôle économique important pour les biens qu'elle procure, fruits de mer, feuilles médicinales, mais intervient aussi dans les processus de régulation de nombreux phénomènes tels que les inondations, l'érosion côtière. La mangrove est aussi un lieu de reproduction des poissons. Donc aujourd'hui, c'est dans ce cadre que nous menons des projets et programmes contribuant à la restauration de cet écosystème à travers le reboisement, mais également des activités génératrices de revenus comme l'ostréiculture, par exemple. Donc, on est toujours dans la conservation. Pourquoi aujourd'hui on parle d'ostréiculture? Parce que nous sommes dans un écosystème où il y a des insulaires, des communautés qui vivent autour de cet écosystème et ils ont besoin de ces ressources pour vivre. Et donc, quand je donne l'exemple de l'ostréiculture, les femmes qui vivent dans les îles, que ce soit dans le delta du Saloum, la Casamance, en Guinée ou en Gambie, c'est quand même un écosystème où les communautés ont besoin des activités génératrices de revenus autour de cet écosystème mangrove. Donc, l'ostréiculture développée par ces femmes mène pour la plupart à la déforestation parce que pour utiliser les produits ostréicoles, ils coupent l'écosystème. Donc, c'est des outils rudimentaires. Et pour combattre cela, on met à leur disposition, par exemple, des parcs ostréicoles qui leur permettent d'avoir les huîtres dont elles cherchaient dans les mangroves. Là, si on met en place des parcs ostréicoles, ça permet de ne pas couper les racines de la mangrove et en même temps, ils auront ces huîtres, ils pourront développer leurs activités génératrices de revenus. Donc, juste pour dire que c'est bien de vouloir conserver, mais c'est mieux d'y associer des alternatives et ça sera difficile. Il sera vraiment difficile d'atteindre notre mission de conservation sans pour autant mettre en avant des activités alternatives pour les communautés. Donc, voilà les quelques exemples que je voulais partager avec vous en attendant d'autres questions. Merci beaucoup, Nadia.
Merci beaucoup, Maimuna. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those examples and really highlighting, the importance of all of these other intersecting issues around kind of energy and food security. And I know you've got a lot of other examples to share about your work on integrating gender equity and social inclusion in the restoration efforts. But in the interest of time, we'll save some of that for a discussion during our Q&A session. But thanks very much, and we're going to now move on to we're going to step out a little bit. So we've heard some really great examples from some local case studies. Maimuna also shared some of the transboundary issues with neighboring countries around shared resources. But we'll be moving now to Eva Maria Okoth, who's the acting regional coordinator for the International Land Coalition. So welcome, Eva. And I wanted to know if you could share with us today your specific focus for the International Land Coalition on rights, and especially land rights. And I wondered if you could share why land rights matter in the context of climate change and biodiversity conservation and also restoration efforts. So over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Nadia. So for those who do not know about ILC, we are a coalition, a global coalition of over 300 diverse organizations who are working collectively to advance people-centered land governance as a pathway to addressing the very global and interconnected challenges that we continue to face, such as climate change, inequality, food systems, and civic space. In Africa, we have a total of 95 members spread across sub-Saharan Africa, and our members are organized into national level and regional thematic multi-stakeholder platforms who are working collectively or to achieve the 10 commitments of ILC that are related to people-centered land governance. And so at ILC, we see these multi-stakeholder platforms as vehicles through which you can address land governance issues in a holistic way, bringing in different stakeholders. And we channel our support in terms of generation of data, use of data, and engagement in policy spaces to position land rights as a key and important aspect of addressing global challenges. Beyond that, ILC also has 2 cross-cutting pledges, including gender justice and defending land and environmental defenders. And these are components that we integrate across all our work. When it comes to work around climate, ILC has a flagship program on people, climate, and nature. And the focus of this flagship or initiative is to position land rights as a key component in addressing climate change through 3 pillars. And the first pillar is, securing land tenure rights as an avenue through which we can advance biodiversity protection and reverse land degradation while positioning communities at the center of all this. The second pillar is about looking at climate solutions that recognize and respect the land rights of communities. So avoiding the top-down approaches to addressing climate change that we see in many cases. And then finally, the last pillar is around securing land tenure rights for sustainable food systems. And so Nadia, like you said, for us, securing land and ensuring equitable land rights will help us achieve our targets and commitments under the Rio Conventions, which has really come out very strongly in what the previous speakers have mentioned. And so why is it that land is very important? Because when we look at the many solutions that are being proposed, they are very land intensive, and this will require a lot of land in order to achieve some of these initiatives, be it restoration, conservation, afforestation. All this requires a lot of land, and hence places a lot of pressure on areas or ecosystems that are already occupied and stewarded by indigenous peoples who have been there for long. And so, for example, in Africa, we see countries like Liberia, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, where governments are already signing land concessions with private investors who are looking to, invest in various nature-based solutions such as carbon markets. And this has resulted in a number of issues being raised, like illegal evictions, land grabbings, and various other threats that really needs to be addressed. And so we need to see how we can leverage already existing opportunities to ensure that secure land tenure is addressed in a very practical way within various frameworks. And one of the opportunities I can say is that increasingly the language within climate conventions already recognize the importance of land. And we are seeing this in frameworks such as the CBD and the UNCCD, where land is now becoming very strong. And this presents an opportunity for us to use that to advocate for even greater integration at national level. However, at national level, we still see many challenges in how land is being taken into account within national and local level implementation of these frameworks. And as ILC, we've had various initiatives where our platforms have been trying to position, and I think I'll share more about this and good examples of how this has happened. Thank you so much, Nadia. Back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, very much for sharing the importance of land and land rights, and land cuts across all of these different conventions, and of course is deeply connected to people in those land and seascapes as well, as we heard from Maimuna too. So up next, linked to all of this is kind of how do we build knowledge systems and integrate evidence around these processes. And so our next speaker is a dear colleague and friend from the CDKN, Fatima Rajbali, who is our Africa lead for the program. And Fatima, I was wondering if you could share what the role of knowledge brokers are in strengthening climate change, biodiversity and land restoration cross linkages, and especially for Africa. Fatima, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And yeah, great to be hearing from all the other speakers about the work across different scales. So yeah, to add the lens of the role of a knowledge broker. So let me start off by first explaining what a knowledge broker is. So as a knowledge broker, which is where I work as part of the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, we see ourselves as linking producers and users of knowledge to ensure the eventual use of it. But more than that, we see knowledge brokering as facilitating change, creating innovation by strengthening relationships and networks, and co-creating new knowledge that is demand-driven. Now, we want to do this process which should really be informed by diverse forms of knowledge. So I'm not just talking about academic and research knowledge, but really kind of building on indigenous, community, experiential knowledge, which I think has really been made reference to by Letoro and Maimuna. So it is increasingly clear that we need to work with others in creative ways to find solutions and opportunities that can guide us towards strengthening the intersection between climate change, biodiversity, and land restoration within the region. And really kind of complementing the kind of AU 2063 agenda that really speaks to all of these issues. And I think knowledge brokers can play multiple critical roles in co-producing relevant knowledge based on diverse sources, facilitating the convening of different actors, and fostering innovative exchanges and interactions that not only inform actions, but also inform learning for the region. To do this, a wide range of activities must be undertaken, including understanding what cross-cutting adaptation, biodiversity, and land restoration evidence is needed, and for whom, and to understand the decisions that need to be made across the different sectors and scales. So this may, for example, include repackaging existing information and knowledge, or responding to addressing specific knowledge gaps, or even designing tailored capacity strengthening trainings for national, subnational institutions and organizations. So in this intervention, I want to look at three particular things that we should consider. One is to make cross-cutting climate change, biodiversity, land restoration knowledge more accessible and user-friendly. So to do that, we need to understand how target audiences consume and engage with knowledge. So for example, for government officials who work on climate change with limited knowledge on, let's say, specific land degradation neutral targets or the global biodiversity framework, we may need to kind of support to develop, for example, a virtual community of practice or briefing notes that really bring together the interconnections so that it's context specific rather than a heavy report, let's say. And knowledge types. So knowledge brokers promote the sharing or co-creation of new knowledge by helping different stakeholders collaborate and exchange experiences and perspectives, which can also elevate learning and empower actors. So I want to give you an example from the Urban Art for Climate project, which is one of CDCAN's locally led adaptation projects led by Grand Slam National in Cameroon. So it focuses on towns which are plagued by deforestation, overfishing, poaching, and so forth, which is leading to a loss of livelihood for many vulnerable people. Now, through the project, young artists and performers in slam, storytelling, and stand-up are supported through an artistic residency, and they're introduced to indigenous traits, conserving the cultural heritage of their ecosystems and biodiversity to help inspire their works. So this can include honey harvesting, eco-construction techniques, and so on. After they produce their work, they then go on a tour to showcase their performances. And these performances are intended to raise awareness about how local actors can change their behaviors and take action to become more resilient to climate change risks. And finally, the last one I want to point out is the importance of fostering innovation and challenging cultural norms. So in many cases, knowledge brokers need to go beyond merely linking producers of knowledge to users. We need to challenge power imbalances, cultural or institutional norms, and even create bridges between different sectors, values, and knowledge types, which is really a critical need when we think about the intersection between the three topics of today's webinar rather. So one quick example of that is in northern Ghana, where CDCAN is working with a women's group, where in northern Ghana, it's very conservative, and these women's groups are using traditional song to advocate for local climate action. Now, these songs convey messages rooted in a combination of research findings, lived experiences, and local knowledge on climate risks and locally led solutions. It's proven an effective means of advocacy in Ghana. And CDCAN has partnered with local radio stations and recorded songs which were broadcasted across 2 municipalities and 200 communities. So these selected women were interviewed through radio discussions, amplifying their messages and giving them a voice and the knowledge visibility in the community. So I'll stop here and get back to you.
Thanks so much, Fatima. Yeah, especially for those examples. And I think both of those examples, actually, we had a question from Richard Hughes, which was around when we're working with different communities, how to engage with different cultures. And I think the example of the songs and the song making process that you highlighted in Northern Ghana was one of those. So to kind of communicate and package information in a way that people are already having conversations around issues that they really care about is important. I wondered, I'll give a moment, I think you can all see that question in the chat. I wondered if there's just one panel member, we'll just hear from maybe one of you, if you wanted to give us another example of how maybe in the work that you've done, you have engaged in specific, how you've ensured that the work has been culturally appropriate in the places where you have. I'll maybe leave it up to Popcorn to see who's the first person that wants to answer there. Okay, maybe that was a bit unfair to spring that question on you, but maybe, and I think you've already used some of those examples in the stories that you shared and in the examples. of how you've worked at different levels with different kind of policy instruments, you know, whether that's through network weaving, through different institutions. But I wanted to hold this conversation in terms of the discussions that will be happening at a global level in the next couple of months. And I wondered if we could hear from all of you, what are you hoping is discussed at the COPs and the associated events, knowing that there's some discussions in negotiation spaces, but very important conversations happening outside those spaces as well. So I wondered if each of you could share, and maybe we'll just do it in the order of how you presented earlier, just for ease, whether you could share, what you're hoping is discussed at the upcoming COPs and associated events. Letora, I'll hand over to you first.
Yeah, thank you so much. What I would love to see discussed more is, based on some of the examples I've shared, is what implementation, how can we get it, what can we get done already, right? Or which frameworks, or which frameworks can we target that we can get done, right? And then kind of learn from that, right? Within the different countries and the different national, subnational levels, which of these frameworks kind of will help us meet the targets, and how can we start focusing on those targets or those policy frameworks to kind of just get them done, and then this will feed into the discussions, right? Because we need to look at the policies we have and kind of see what within those ones, which ones would be most feasible to work, as opposed to maybe bringing in new language and language that may take, again, another several years to be negotiated, get definitions. This is usually the process, which can be quite long and very arduous. So for me, it's right, get to implementing some of the stuff that we already have that actually speaks to the targets that we have, and we can actually start meeting the targets. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Letora. And I think in updating of the Global Biodiversity Framework, that's something that they really wanted to focus in on, is the means of implementation, which was maybe lacking in previous agreements, and really thinking, about how we can get started. So I think, and hopefully in the next time these COPs come around for biodiversity, it happens every 2 years, we're no longer talking about the how, we're actually sharing examples of what has been done. So thank you very much for that. Maimuna, over to you for the same question. What are you hoping is discussed at the upcoming COPs?
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Avant de parler de Next COP, je voudrais juste préciser que les projets et les exemples qui ont été partagés tout à l'heure, il y a quand même une bonne prise en compte du genre dans notre approche, parlant de genre, que ce soit sur les projets de foyer améliorés que je présentais tout à l'heure. On a travaillé avec des jeunes et des groupements de femmes, des personnes vivant avec un handicap. Que ce soit dans le projet ostréicole aussi, nous avons travaillé avec les femmes, les jeunes qui ont reboisé, etc. Ça, c'est tout à l'heure, je voulais l'ajouter avant d'aller aux prochaines étapes. Donc, pour moi, globalement, nous sommes sur le terrain et nous travaillons à différents niveaux, que ce soit avec les femmes, les communautés qui sont sur le terrain, mais également avec les institutions. Et donc, pour moi, lors des prochaines COP, il serait bien que les gouvernements, les entreprises, la société civile, ils devraient intensifier et accélérer les actions de restauration de la terre dans toutes les régions du monde comme solution rentable pour atteindre les différents ODD qu'on s'est fixés, tout en prenant en compte les questions de genre et inclusion sociale. Et donc, pour ça, c'est un message que je lance pour la COP 16 qui se tiendra en décembre. Et donc, pour moi, la conservation de la biodiversité, il est important de mettre en avant des alternatives au profit des communautés pour les solutions durables et inclusives. Pour la COP 29 qui se tiendra à Bakou, nous espérons avoir des résultats concrets sur le financement, sur l'objectif mondial en matière d'adaptation, le Global Adaptation. Je pense que c'est important, mais également l'opérationnalisation des financements des pertes et préjudices, tout en prenant en compte les questions de genre de manière transversale, genre et inclusion sociale de manière transversale. Donc voilà en quelque sorte ce que je voulais partager avec vous, Nadia. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Maimouna. And yeah, very direct asks of those specific COPs that are coming up, and the importance of including, gender equity and social inclusion throughout. And that's, a cross-cutting mechanism to really make sure that the implementation that happens from these different agreements is done in ways that support current and future generations as well, and kind of facilitate them to continue to adapt and thrive. Eva, over to you. What are you hoping is addressed at the upcoming COPs?
Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, from my perspective, I think land rights, always central, and this should never be lost in any negotiation. So we have to make sure that in defining indicators under the CBD, in defining commitments under UNCCD, UNFCCC, land rights must always be central to everything that is being discussed. And then secondly, something very close or similar to what Leitoro has said, I think we now need to have a more transformative approach to translating these commitments into impact, on the ground. Because so much has been said at global level, at regional level, but it is not yet resulting in the impact that we want to see and the positive change we want to see. So at national level, we need to see these conversations trickling down and more bottom-up approaches to formulating policies and targets in country, as well as implementation of those targets in country in an inclusive way. And some of the examples I can share already is, as ILC, we have really been working very closely with the national land coalitions to see how they can also inform target setting under the 3 Rio conventions at national level. So currently, like our national land coalition in Togo, in Burkina Faso, and in Kenya are trying really much to be involved in the NDC target setting so that they can integrate land tenure considerations there. Also, NLC in Senegal and other countries have also been participating in national level dialogues on how land tenure can be integrated very concretely in land degradation neutrality targets under the UNFCCC. So this is the kind of engagement we want to see trickle down at national level, and to make sure that all stakeholders are involved and that we receive the impact we need to see. So yes, that is from my perspective, Nadia.
Thanks so much, and a very clear call there around land rights as this unifying topic across all of these conventions. We did have a question, another question around why don't we have a COP for all the Rio conventions? And I think that's kind of what this webinar is about. Like, how can we, rather than spending money across all of these different spaces in different places in the world, but really start to think about these things in an integrated way, because they have to both be spoken about and acted upon in an integrated way. And so maybe handing over to you, Fatima, for what you're hoping to see in the next couple of months at some of the negotiations going forward.
Yeah, I'm not really saying anything new. I totally agree with what all the speakers have just said. I do think it's an incredibly important moment for us to, and I agree that, the global spaces are there for negotiations, and they have a purpose that in a way kind of requires domestication. So there's such a critical value for kind of the mapping of synergies between existing government policies that I think, both well, actually everyone here has spoken about. And this, by doing that, we increase coherence and efficiency on the allocation of resources. So, there are clear overlaps between the measures, the various sort of targets and measurements between the NAPs, the NDCs, the NDSAPs, and the LDN targets. And if we are going to have duplication, let's at least have timely duplication of efforts across national administrations, especially with the new NDCs, the new and updated NBSAPs, there really is an opportunity to be aligning with existing the various sort of targets that are set out. But I just want to mention one thing with regards to finance. I mean, if we have coherence at a planning stage, then we also have a little bit more coherence on financing requirements. And that's what you can take to the global level or to various other sort of financial sort of institutions. We need to be identifying actions for co-financing to be, and that will also enable governments to use smartly the very limited resources they have. Thanks.
Sorry, you would think that after all of this, I would be able to find my unmute button, but my mouse was having a holiday. Thank you so much for all of those interventions. And I think it's, really important points about the work that we can start doing already in our countries, finding out whether we have national platforms, figuring out who our national focal points are, making sure that if there is a call that comes out to support, some kind of participation or engagement process, or an ask for evidence, we are ready to supply some of that and link it to the work that we're doing. We have a couple more minutes before we wrap up. I'm always curious with, when you have these panels, you've already shared what you'd like to hear in terms of the next COPs. But do you see, other than the COPs, do you see any opportunities over the next couple of months? And maybe you can share if your organization is involved specifically in upcoming events. We will try and share a whole lot of resources and links in the chat as well, that people can find out more about your organizations. We flash them up on the slide. We're definitely going to, I've been taking a lot of notes, and I think we'll write up a blog that consolidates all this information, because I see so many important points coming out where we can share some more resources. But this opportunity for the global community to hear from each of you now, what does your organization have planned? And it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically around those COPs, but in terms of ensuring synergies across these different agendas, ensuring gender equity and social inclusion considerations are respected. What are some of your thoughts? Maybe should we go backwards this time?
Sure. So there are a couple of things that CDCAN is going to be involved in. I'm sure, Nadia, you could speak to many of the events taking place at the upcoming COPs. So definitely watching that space, engaging. CDCAN is really built around partnerships and collaborations, and it's great to be with all these speakers here, because we are working with them one way or the other, or a part of their coalitions and their networks, and that's exactly how CDCAN functions. I do think one of the things that we do need more of, and this is something that CDCAN is striving to do, and would love to work with others on this front, is developing good practice case studies. And because it's so important that we develop learning and examples of practice using multiple mediums that really provide contextually specific sort of examples, which I think there's a great demand for within the region. So, for the region where there's kind of an opportunity to also kind of cross-learn from other countries, I think that will be an incredibly exciting thing to be taken forward, and one that we are looking forward to working with many of the partners here today.
Thanks very much, Fatima. Maybe Eva, over to you for a quick intervention.
Thanks, Nadia. Yeah, I think there are numerous opportunities coming up where ILC is looking to engage more and more and take forward the conversations. Starting with the upcoming International Rural Women's Day, where we are going to continue highlighting some of this key messaging and the importance of women land rights is in all these initiatives, and how those linkages can be enhanced. As ILC Africa, we also strive on an annual basis to convene forums, regional forums, such as the Africa Land Forum, that provides a space where different actors and stakeholders can come together to dialogue on key thematic areas of common interest. And I'm sure climate remains one of the key areas that we are looking to engage more in from a land rights perspective. And then in 2025, of course, plans are underway for the Global Land Forum, which is another space that ILC convenes various actors from across the world, really to speak about and dialogue on issues of land governance more broadly. So these are the upcoming spaces, but more and more, of course, opportunities exist where we can engage and have these conversations. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Eva. Maimuna, over to you for some interventions of what you maybe have planned in the next few months.
For the next 3 months, nous planifions de dérouler des activités de session, des side events que nous prévoyons d'organiser lors de la COP, et nous invitons l'ensemble des parties prenantes à y participer. Et là, ça va porter sur différentes thématiques. Et la plupart des sessions seront déroulées avec le gouvernement du Sénégal, les autres organisations de la société civile, que ce soit sur les questions de genre et inclusion sociale, que ce soit sur les questions de biodiversité, mais également sur la transparence. Donc, il y a plusieurs événements qui seront déroulés lors de la COP 29, mais également COP 16. Donc, où nous serons très présents en 2025 également par rapport aux différents événements sur la désertification. Nous le célébrons chaque année, donc où nous mobilisons l'ensemble des parties prenantes et aussi au niveau, nous mobilisons également les différentes télévisions pour qu'il y ait une bonne sensibilisation sur les questions de changement climatique, sur les questions de désertification et aussi avec des actions concrètes qu'on montre à l'ensemble des communautés, ce qu'on est en train de faire, et nous invitons l'ensemble des parties prenantes qui seront intéressées à ces événements par rapport aux questions de changement climatique, désertification, mais également sur les énergies renouvelables.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Maimuna. And then last but definitely not least, Letora, I wanted to give you the kind of closing marks, because I think what you also represent is youth in these spaces. And I know you are very active in youth-led movements and processes, and essentially the importance of including youth voices across all of these different negotiation spaces as we shape the world that young people are set to inherit. So maybe some final words from you, Letora.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think really when we speak about it, it's mainstreaming the knowledge and youth across all levels, right? I've been speaking the whole time about all the levels, from the local level that it could look like the herders who are not going to school, the young people who are not there, but also how do we bring that knowledge, and these are things that we need to consider, or potentially within the spaces that we have at the COP, the youth who are being involved in negotiations, giving them more space to be able to actually advocate for some of the priorities that we face, the realities that we currently face, and seeing how this can actually flow up without it being necessarily being ticked off as youth were present, or that for me would be the ideal situation. And because there's a lot of, and we've already mentioned it before, there's also lots of case studies of young people, but also communities that are already doing work to address the 3 Rio conventions, right? So kind of seeing more of this, that's what I look forward to, seeing these stories of what change is already happening and how can we further these changes over the next couple of months. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists for sharing that. I think one message that has come out loud and clear, and that CDKN has been listening as a knowledge brokering organization to try and capture these stories of practice. And I know there are lots of organizations that are also doing that. So how do we start bringing those stories and those good practice examples to the fore and start linking them with a lot of policy processes? I know that we are out of time. I just wanted to mention very, very briefly, so CDKN will be involved in the COPs going forward. We have this wonderful platform, the Resilience Hub, which is the virtual summit at the moment. It'll have a physical space at COP29, and CDKN and South North with some other lovely partners that you've heard, some of them already during this webinar series. We'll be planning some events linked to the Biodiversity and Climate Challenge. We also have at COP16, we are running a multi-actor dialogue around human rights-based approaches for biodiversity and climate action. And so bringing back that important issue of rights under Section C of the new Global Biodiversity Framework, which really does advocate for acknowledging diverse values and knowledge, respecting human rights, and really thinking about what are those good practice examples. And so we'll be having conversations and running side events and supporting our partners, because that's also the other thing that came out very clearly is there are incredible organizations doing incredible work, but how do we start working together? How do we amplify ours and each other's voices into these spaces and really start advocating for the change that we want to see happen? So we'll be summarizing this conversation and taking those messages into the COPs as we go forward. If there are any people listening online and you'd like to learn more about CDKN, please do go to our website. But we'll also be looking for ways to engage in other spaces so we can continue these conversations going forward. So I know it is lunchtime. I think there's an hour break now, and then the programming continues. There are two incredible sessions happening this afternoon. The one is around intersectionality and climate change, and again, profiling the voice of young speakers into that space and really digging into issues related to mental health, which is a really important issue. And there'll also be another locally led adaptation conversation being led by Evina happening in an hour's time. So just to say thank you to the organizers for allowing us to have this space, and thank you so much to the speakers. This has been such an incredible conversation, and we wish you a very lovely rest of your days wherever you are in the world.